Florida is often seen as a paradise place with endless sunshine, sandy beaches, and a booming economy. But behind the palm trees and luxury high-rises, a growing crisis is unfolding. Homelessness in Florida is rising at an alarming rate, affecting individuals and families from all walks of life. While many assume that homelessness is simply a result of bad choices, the reality is much more complex. Economic struggles, lack of affordable housing, and social issues have all contributed to the rise of homelessness in the state. In this video, we'll explore 10 major causes behind Florida's homelessness crisis, breaking down why so many people are ending up on the streets. Some of these causes might seem obvious, while others are surprising. Stick around until the end, because the final cause is something no one is talking about, but it's affecting thousands of people across the state. Stay till the end, because reason number 1 is something no one is talking about. 10. Lack of affordable housing. Florida is often seen as a paradise with stunning beaches, warm weather, and a booming economy. But beneath the surface, a serious housing crisis is unfolding. The lack of affordable housing is one of the biggest reasons homelessness is increasing in Florida, and for many people, finding a safe and stable place to live is becoming nearly impossible. In the past decade, Florida has experienced a sharp rise in housing costs, especially in major cities like Miami, Tampa, and Orlando. The average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Miami is now over $2,500 per month. Just a few years ago, in 2020, that same apartment cost around $1,500. This steep increase has put enormous financial pressure on working-class residents who are already struggling to make ends meet. When rent jumps by hundreds of dollars in a short period, many people simply can't keep up. One of the main reasons behind this affordability crisis is Florida's booming real estate market. Investors and developers are flooding the state, eager to build luxury apartments, high-rise condos, and expensive single-family homes. While this might seem like economic growth, the reality is that these developments are designed for wealthier residents and out-of-state buyers. Meanwhile, affordable housing projects are often ignored, leaving low-income individuals with fewer and fewer options. Adding to the problem is the fact that wages in Florida have not kept pace with rising housing costs. While rent and property prices have skyrocketed, income levels have remained largely stagnant. Many Floridians work in industries like hospitality, retail, and healthcare, jobs that are essential but often come with low wages. A retail worker making $15 per hour might bring home around $2,400 a month before taxes, which means they will be spending nearly all of their income just on rent. That doesn't even include utilities, groceries, transportation, or medical expenses. The lack of rent control policies in Florida makes the situation even worse. Unlike some states that have laws to prevent landlords from dramatically increasing rent, Florida allows property owners to raise prices as much as they want. In some cases, tenants have seen their rent jump by 20% or more in a single year. Without regulations to protect renters, many are forced out of their homes with little notice and no affordable alternatives. The result of this crisis is a growing number of people experiencing homelessness. Some end up in overcrowded motels. Others sleep in their cars, and many are left with no choice but to live on the streets. Families, single parents, and even full-time workers are among those struggling to secure housing. To address this issue, Florida must invest in more affordable housing projects, provide better tenant protections, and ensure wages keep up with the cost of living. Without urgent action, the homelessness crisis will continue to worsen, impacting communities across the state. 9. Low wages and high cost of living. Even if someone has a job, that doesn't mean they can afford to live in Florida. A growing number of employed people are finding themselves at risk of homelessness simply because their wages aren't keeping up with the rising cost of living. This is one of the biggest contributors to Florida's homelessness crisis, and it's a problem affecting people across various industries. Florida's economy is heavily dependent on tourism, hospitality, retail, and service-based jobs. These industries employ millions of people, but many of the jobs offer low wages and few benefits. In 2024, Florida's minimum wage is around $12 per hour, and while that may seem like a decent amount at first glance, it's nowhere near enough to cover basic living expenses. For a person working full-time at this wage, their monthly earnings before taxes would be approximately $1,920. In cities like Miami, Orlando, and Tampa, where average rents exceed $2,000 per month, this simply isn't sustainable. Even for those earning above minimum wage, the cost of living continues to rise. Gas prices, groceries, utilities, and healthcare expenses have all increased in recent years, putting additional financial strain on residents. A trip to the grocery store that may have cost $50 a few years ago can now easily exceed $100 for the same items. Utility bills have also skyrocketed, especially in the summer when air conditioning becomes a necessity. Many Floridians are living paycheck to paycheck, meaning they have little to no savings to fall back on. This makes them especially vulnerable to financial shocks. A single unexpected expense, like a car repair, medical bill, or emergency home repair, can push someone into a financial downward spiral. Once a person falls behind on rent, catching up can be nearly impossible. For example, if a tenant is unable to pay rent on time, they might receive an eviction notice. In Florida, eviction laws tend to favor landlords, meaning tenants can be forced out of their homes relatively quickly. With an eviction on their record, finding a new place to live becomes much more difficult, as many landlords refuse to rent to individuals with past evictions. This leads some people to stay in motels, live in their cars, or rely on friends and family for temporary housing. Another factor making the situation worse is that Florida does not have strong tenant protection laws. In some states, there are regulations preventing landlords from drastically increasing rent, but in Florida, rent hikes are largely unregulated. This allows property owners to raise rent by hundreds of dollars without warning, forcing tenants to either pay the higher amount or move out. The bottom line is that Florida's wages simply do not match the rising cost of living. While the state has seen economic growth, that growth has not benefited everyone equally. Unless wages increase or the cost of housing and basic necessities is controlled, more and more working-class individuals will find themselves at risk of homelessness. 8. Hurricane displacement. Florida is no stranger to hurricanes. Every year, the state faces powerful storms that bring heavy rains, flooding, and destructive winds. While some people can rebuild after a hurricane, many are left homeless due to the damage and financial strain these storms cause. Hurricanes destroy thousands of homes every year in Florida. Strong winds rip off roofs. Floodwaters ruin entire buildings, and storm surges make entire neighborhoods unlivable. In many cases, homeowners and renters have no choice but to evacuate, leaving their homes behind. Even after the storm passes, the damage left behind can take months or even years to fix. Insurance is supposed to help people recover, but it's not always that simple. Many homeowners have insurance policies with high deductibles, meaning they must pay thousands of dollars out of pocket before their coverage kicks in. Others find that their claims are denied due to technicalities or disputes with insurance companies. Renters are even worse off, as they often have no insurance at all. If their apartment or rental home is destroyed, they are left with nothing and nowhere to go. Government assistance programs like FEMA provide some help, but they are often slow and limited. After major hurricanes like Irma, Michael, and Ian, many Florida residents reported waiting months for aid that never came. Some people received small checks that didn't come close to covering their losses. Others didn't qualify for assistance at all because of bureaucratic red tape. Even for those who do receive help, rebuilding is a long and difficult process. Many people lose their jobs after a hurricane because businesses shut down or tourism declines. Without a steady income, paying rent or finding a new home becomes nearly impossible. Temporary housing options like motels and shelters fill up quickly, leaving many people with no place to stay. For people already living paycheck to paycheck, a hurricane can be the final blow that pushes them into homelessness. Some families move in with relatives, while others sleep in their cars or on the streets. The problem is even worse for elderly residents and people with disabilities, who may struggle to evacuate or find new housing. As climate change leads to stronger and more frequent hurricanes, this problem will only get worse. More people will lose their homes, more businesses will close, and more communities will be left in crisis. Without better disaster relief programs and more affordable housing options, Florida's homeless population will continue to grow with each passing storm. 7. Mental health crisis. Mental health struggles are one of the biggest, yet most overlooked causes of homelessness. Many people experiencing homelessness suffer from conditions like depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, or PTSD. Without proper treatment, these individuals struggle to maintain employment, relationships, and stable housing. Florida has a severe shortage of mental health care services. The state ranks among the lowest in the nation when it comes to funding for mental health programs. This means that many people who need help simply don't get it. Therapy, medication, and psychiatric care are expensive, and many people don't have insurance to cover the costs. Even those who do have insurance often face long waiting lists or difficulty finding providers who accept their coverage. When someone has an untreated mental illness, it can be incredibly difficult to hold down a job or maintain stable housing. They may struggle with basic responsibilities like paying bills, keeping appointments, or even getting out of bed in the morning. Some people experience paranoia or hallucinations that make it impossible to live independently. Others turn to drugs or alcohol as a way to self-medicate, which only worsens their situation. Once someone becomes homeless, their mental health often deteriorates further. Living on the streets is stressful, dangerous, and exhausting. Homeless individuals are more likely to experience violence, sexual assault, and exploitation. They also face constant fear of being arrested, harassed, or forcibly removed from public spaces. Without proper support, it becomes incredibly difficult for people with mental illnesses to escape homelessness. Many shelters and housing programs have strict requirements, such as sobriety or proof of employment, that mentally ill individuals may not be able to meet. As a result, they remain stuck in a cycle of homelessness, hospitalization, and sometimes incarceration. To truly address this issue, Florida needs better mental health services, more affordable treatment options, and supportive housing programs for those struggling with mental illness. Without these resources, thousands of people will continue to suffer on the streets. 6. Drug and alcohol addiction. Substance abuse is another major factor contributing to homelessness in Florida. While not every homeless person struggles with addiction, there is a strong connection between drug and alcohol abuse and long-term homelessness. The opioid epidemic has hit Florida hard. Drugs like fentanyl, heroin, and prescription painkillers have led to a sharp increase in addiction-related deaths. Many people who develop substance abuse problems lose their jobs, their families, and eventually their homes. Once someone becomes homeless, it becomes even harder to seek treatment, as rehab programs are expensive and often have long wait lists. Alcoholism is also a major issue among Florida's homeless population. Some people turn to alcohol as a way to cope with trauma, depression, or the stress of being homeless. Unfortunately, excessive drinking can lead to further financial struggles, health problems, and difficulty finding stable housing. One of the biggest challenges is that many homeless shelters have strict rules against drug or alcohol use. This means that people struggling with addiction are often turned away from shelters, leaving them with nowhere to go. Without access to rehab programs, medical care, and supportive housing, people battling addiction remain trapped in a cycle of homelessness. Expanding treatment programs and making rehab more accessible could help many people get off the streets and back on their feet. 5. Gentrification. Gentrification is changing the face of Florida's cities, and while it brings economic growth, it also pushes out low-income residents who can no longer afford to live in their own communities. Wealthy developers and investors are buying up properties in lower-income neighborhoods, renovating them, and turning them into luxury apartments and high-end retail spaces. While this makes cities look more attractive and modern, it also raises rent prices dramatically. Many long-time residents find themselves priced out of their own homes. A neighborhood where rent was once $800 a month might suddenly see prices jump to $2,000 after new developments move in. Without affordable housing options, these residents are left with few choices. Some move far away from their jobs, while others end up homeless. Gentrification also hurts local businesses. Small, family-owned stores and restaurants are often replaced by expensive boutiques and chain stores. This eliminates jobs for the working-class residents who once relied on those businesses. Without policies that protect long-term residents, Florida's cities will continue to push more people onto the streets. 4. Criminal backgrounds and barriers to employment. Many formerly incarcerated individuals struggle to find housing and employment after being released from prison. Landlords and employers often refuse to give them a second chance, making it nearly impossible for them to rebuild their lives. Many rental applications require background checks, and landlords automatically reject those with criminal records. Similarly, many businesses are hesitant to hire ex-offenders. Without stable income, affording rent becomes nearly impossible, leading to homelessness. To fix this, Florida needs better reentry programs that provide job training, affordable housing, and second chances. Without these, ex-offenders are at high risk of returning to crime simply to survive. 3. Lack of shelters and support services. Florida's homeless population continues to rise, but the number of shelters and support services is not keeping up with the demand. Many cities have too few shelters, forcing thousands of homeless individuals to sleep in parks, on sidewalks, or in their cars. Even when shelters exist, they often have strict rules, limited space, or unsafe conditions that make them unappealing to those in need. One of the biggest problems is the sheer lack of shelter beds. In major cities like Miami, Orlando, and Tampa, shelters often reach full capacity early in the evening, leaving many people with no place to go. Families with children, women fleeing domestic violence, and individuals with disabilities are often turned away because there simply isn't enough room. Even for those who do manage to get a bed, conditions in many shelters are poor. Overcrowding, lack of privacy, and concerns about safety make some people prefer sleeping on the streets over staying in a shelter. Many shelters also have strict rules that prevent people from bringing their pets, partners, or belongings, forcing them to make impossible choices. Another major issue is the lack of long-term support services. Shelters are supposed to be a temporary solution, but without resources to help people find jobs, housing, or mental health care, many individuals get stuck in a cycle of homelessness. Some shelters only offer a place to sleep for a night, without any programs to help people transition back into stable housing. Florida also has strict laws that make it harder for homeless individuals to survive. Some cities have criminalized sleeping in public spaces, panhandling, or even giving food to homeless people in parks. Instead of helping people find permanent solutions, these laws make life even harder for those already struggling. To truly address homelessness, Florida needs to invest in more shelters, better support programs, and policies that focus on long-term solutions rather than punishment. 2. Domestic violence and family breakdown. Domestic violence is one of the leading causes of homelessness, especially for women and children. Every year, thousands of Floridians flee abusive relationships, only to find themselves with nowhere to go. Without enough emergency shelters, affordable housing, or financial support, many survivors end up living on the streets. For many victims, staying in an abusive relationship can seem like the only option. Leaving often means losing financial security, housing, and even custody of children. Abusers frequently control money, making it nearly impossible for their victims to save up for a new place to live. Without friends or family to turn to, many survivors have no choice but to enter homeless shelters, if they can even find one with space. Florida's domestic violence shelters are often overcrowded and underfunded. Many have waiting lists, meaning survivors must either stay in a dangerous situation or become homeless while they wait for an opening. Some shelters also have time limits, forcing survivors to leave after a few weeks, even if they haven't found stable housing yet. Single mothers and their children are among the most vulnerable. A lack of affordable childcare and job opportunities makes it incredibly difficult for mothers to regain financial independence. Many end up cycling between shelters, couch surfing, or living in their cars while trying to get back on their feet. Family breakdown is another major factor in homelessness. Many young people become homeless after being kicked out of their homes due to family conflicts, abuse, or financial struggles. LGBTQ+ youth are especially at risk, as some are disowned by their families after coming out. Without support, these young people are forced to survive on their own, often turning to dangerous situations just to get by. To reduce homelessness caused by domestic violence and family breakdown, Florida needs more emergency shelters, affordable housing programs, and job assistance for survivors. Without these resources, many people will remain trapped in cycles of abuse and homelessness. 1. Senior homelessness and the retirement crisis. One of the fastest growing groups of homeless individuals in Florida is senior citizens. Rising rent prices, inadequate retirement savings, and the high cost of healthcare have left many elderly residents unable to afford stable housing. With no family support and limited income, many seniors find themselves on the streets, sleeping in their cars, or moving between temporary shelters. Many seniors rely on Social Security as their primary source of income, but for most, it's not enough to cover rent, utilities, and medical expenses. In Florida, the average monthly Social Security check is around $1,500, while the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment is over $1,800. That means many seniors are forced to choose between paying for housing, food, or medication. Healthcare costs also contribute to senior homelessness. Many elderly Floridians suffer from chronic illnesses like diabetes, heart disease, or mobility issues. Without proper medical care, their conditions worsen, making it even harder for them to maintain stable housing. Some end up in hospitals, but once they are discharged, they have nowhere to go. Affordable housing options for seniors are extremely limited. Many low-income housing programs have years-long waiting lists, leaving elderly individuals without a place to live. Some try to move into assisted living facilities, but those can cost thousands of dollars per month, far beyond what most seniors can afford. Florida's warm climate attracts retirees, but it also makes life difficult for homeless seniors. Extreme heat, hurricanes, and lack of shelter space put them at high risk of illness and death. Many end up sleeping on benches, in parking lots, or in their cars, struggling to survive each day. To prevent more seniors from becoming homeless, Florida needs better senior housing programs, increased Social Security benefits, and expanded healthcare services for low-income elderly individuals. Without these changes, the state's aging population will continue to struggle with homelessness at alarming rates.